All right. Are we recording? All right. So welcome to Parenting Teens During COVID-19. So we are here tonight to talk about just teens, and we will be recording this. So you want to go to our welcome. So a few housekeeping things. We have muted everybody on the call, but they can use the chat box if you have anything to add. And we're going to give our emails at the end. So anyone who's listening to this as a recording, you're welcome to email us. So this is being recorded just so that everybody's aware. So I am Lynn Arner, and I'm a child development specialist, and I've been working in the field for over 30 years. And I consult with families when their children are struggling, but I also do work with childcare providers, both coaching and training. And I'm also a parent, which is pretty relevant to today. So I have parented 4 kids through their teen years. I guess my youngest is 19, so the baby is still in his teens for a little while longer, but you know, they've all gone through those rough teen years. And then I have 4 grandchildren, but they're years away from that. So Joyce.
Okay, and my name's Joyce Lee, and I do a lot of what Lynn does. We've actually had the privilege to be able to work with her for the last 20 years that I've been in Yolo County, working as a facilitator, trainer, assessor, all different types of things in the field. And I have 2 boys, one 18 and one who's 22. So I would definitely still say that my 22-year-old still, I think, kind of falls into some of this stuff, definitely, and certainly my 18-year-old. So I'm delighted to be here to be able to talk to you about this. This is actually kind of fun to be able to talk about teenagers.
Yeah. So Joyce, I'm going to ask you a question here. So parents are often asking us, my teen is completely unmotivated, so what are some usual ways that you can motivate teens?
Right. This is what we hear all the time. This is definitely going on in my house from here, every so often, much more than that, actually. But this is a big part. This is pretty universal. And I think that in itself is reassuring because it is very universal. But let's look a little bit about why that might be the case. So what usually helps teens to be motivated, right? This is such a different time. And actually, developmentally, teens are motivated because they are quite in the moment. That's where they are developmentally. So what is happening right now is what's going on. So that really helps them to be able to go and do things because it is so much in the moment. A lot of times, kind of like how toddlers are actually. The other part is that teens they're motivated by the quote unquote pressure of time. And when we think of pressure a lot of times in our day to day, we think of it as a very awful thing that's huge and kids are really falling under that. And that is the case. But on the other hand of it too, pressure also means the assignment's due on Tuesday. So even if you do it late Monday night or early Tuesday morning, there's a deadline. So that's the kind of pressure that we're talking about. You have to get to practice by 3:30. Like you really do have to get there. And so if you miss enough practices, then you're kind of off the team. So those are the kinds of pressures that we're talking about. That developmentally is really in place. We like and we're working towards having our teenagers have that autonomy and internal motivation kick in. But developmentally, those are the things that are there that really do help them and will get them to that place as adults.
So Joyce, we don't have those right now. There aren't those time pressures right now.
Right. And we don't, but we still want them to be motivated because the flip side is that motivation helps us to accomplish things, right? Like if we're motivated, we can accomplish. And so why is it so important? Well, when we talk about accomplishments right now, we're not talking about these big, huge life things, but even small things throughout the day. it really helps teens to be able to accomplish something because it will make them feel better and motivate them to the next thing. It's like a lot of times for us, we don't want to get up and do these things because we don't really have to. But yet when we can get some things done throughout the day, it does help us to feel much better about that. So a couple things around that is consider it what it means to be productive. And so I don't want to say set the bar lower, but in some ways I am saying that. Think a little bit about right now, spring semester anyway for kids. It's a pretty low productive time in that, a lot of the academic stuff is kind of out of the way. Yes, juniors, they might have some more things, but this is really kind of that fun time. I have a senior at home, so poor guy. He actually said a couple weeks ago, darn, this was going to be the time where it was like all those years of school. Now it's like no school, and I was just going to go and hang out at school to be with friends. That was what he was going to do, which is really understandable. So thinking that it's a low production time anyway. So really thinking about, what we mean when we mean productive. And then again, like I said, even small things that you can get done are really accomplishments. So those are some things that we might want to think about when we think about these, about motivation and unmotivation. Okay.
So here's another question. So I go back and forth from thinking that I have all these great ideas to make the best of all these events that my teens are going to be missing. And the other thought of, I get it. Nothing is going to replace these missing events and, things that are never going to happen. So how can I help my teen to process this and move forward?
Right. And this is certainly something we're seeing across the board with teens. And it could be big things like they're missing graduations, proms, like those senior events that are happening, but also in another way, they're missing being able to just hang out with their friends, which is really, really important. So this missing stuff can really be that whole spectrum. So I think understanding that is a big part of it. The first thing that we can do for them, just like what it would be to make me feel better, it's important to acknowledge that this is really hard and to acknowledge the feelings that are coming with it. And oftentimes those feelings really are disappointment, anger, feeling hopeless about things. And so really being able to acknowledge that, yes, this is a really hard time and we're really disappointed. You're really disappointed, or I'm really disappointed, whatever those might be. I think that's very important. I think disappointment is probably the biggest feeling that is often going on with our teens, and it is a very real thing. And if you think about what that feeling really means, that is a bummer, and really being able to say that with kids. And a lot of times we don't think that as very important, but it is really important when we can just name it, right? We can't solve it, but we can name it and say, I get that. The other part of this that I hear in this question is that giving our kids time to grieve, because if you have disappointment, then you really do have to grieve the losses of the moment. So
And the teens have so many losses right now. Like it's a lot of loss with all those things that they're not able to do.
right, right. And so being able to let them grieve about that, and and when they do grieve about that, really being there to hear them. So again, you don't have to have the answers. I think a lot of times as parents, what we want to do is we want to make it better. And so when we hear something, we're like, oh, okay, but here, let's do this. And we don't, and that can kick in later on. That's, those are useful in many ways as parents that we can offer, but I do think they need that time and space to be able to have that. So just showing up, listening, acknowledging, I think is a big part of this step. And then also understanding that with these feelings, naturally what's going to come, the action that's going to come is to kind of be inaction or to disengage. And so again, giving them that time and space to do that. Now I know we're several weeks into this, so we're probably, thinking, okay, we've done this enough. But if you haven't taken the time to honestly and genuinely do those first couple of steps, I think it's absolutely worthwhile to backtrack a little bit, even though we've been in shelter for several weeks now, to go back and revisit that grieving, acknowledging, and showing up and listening. But after that, right, and we're going to talk more about this as we get into our other questions, what else might be really important to share with our teens is that sometimes we need a better than nothing plan. So I'm going to talk about the big thing, like something like graduation, right? That might not happen most likely in the way that we are going to be used to. So, but what can we do that it's not going to take the place of that, but maybe there are some pieces of that that we can do and celebrate because it's better than doing nothing. And that can be a hard thing, but it's also a place that we want to bring them to.
Right.
Mhm. Okay. You know, Lynn, we often hear with teens some form of my life is absolutely ruined. And oftentimes it's with great drama. And we laugh, but we also know it's really real. It's absolutely real. So then how do I respond?
Yeah, so let's think about this. So, we've never done this before. We've never had to, be put in this kind of position before. So, this probably is the biggest thing that our teens have ever been through. And, it's probably the biggest obstacle that they've ever really had in their lives. And so, teens love to be autonomous and independent. And, that is the exact opposite of what they're able to do right now. Right now, they just hang out at home with us. It's like it's not independent, it's not autonomous. It's exactly not what they want it to be. And so we need to be real with our kids. We need to let them know, that we've never been through this before either. This is unprecedented, really. And so it is a big deal. This really is a big deal, and we need to acknowledge that. So we also need to really listen to our kids. So you were speaking to this too, Joyce. I think that it's, to just be genuine with them, listen to them, validate those feelings like you were talking about, that, disappointment and sadness and frustration that they're feeling right now, to let them know that we really do understand, we see their world, and we get it. And so an example is, our teen wants to just stay in bed all day long and, refuses to go outside, and we're like, just go out in the fresh air. And so, we want to say, it's so nice and cozy in your bed. I get it. I don't like to, go outside all the time either. And, I've been spending a lot more time inside. So we kind of want to empathize with them. And then, but what about if you go with me when I walk the dog? It's just going to take 6 minutes, like just go with me, and I'd love your company, and we could chat, and so just sort of see if you can empathize with them, and let them know that you really do understand what they're going through. And then the next thing that we want to do is we really want to kind of process with them, talking to them, talking through what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, is really the best thing that we could possibly do. So remember to ask, don't tell. That's a really important one with our teens. And so, what ideas do you have for how you could, feel better, or what we could do, or, ask them, what is it like for you? Ask them how, to tell you about that. So first empathy, and then perspective. So, we want to give them some perspective. I don't think that this is going to be the thing that breaks you. I really know that you can, make it through this. So, we can reassure our teens that while this is unprecedented, and we may be, it may affect a few things in their lives right now, that the trajectory of their life is not necessarily going to change because of this.
Right. They're going to be able to achieve a lot of those bigger goals that they still want to do.
Yeah.
It may look a little different. That road might be different, and that will be challenging, but they'll be able to do that. Right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, really just overall being a voice of that reality and reassurance, and, sharing our experience with them.
So here's the big one that we hear repeatedly. Should I limit screen time? And I think this is kind of a nice way of putting it, right? It's more like, I'm tearing my hair out. What do I do with these devices?
Right, right. Yes, we do. We hear it a lot. So I guess what I really want to say is, what you can see here, don't be against technology, be for other things. And so the idea that what else do we want them to be doing? We have these other goals for them, things like going outside, getting out of their bed. So how do we help them to do these other things? And so they kind of are these developmental imperatives that they have. They have to eat, they have to, have some social time, they have to, do their homework. They have, like these are things that are a part of everyday teen life. And so how can we make sure that those are a part of their day, rather than focusing so much on, but they're on the computer. And so maybe if we have meals and a little exercise and some family time, and they have to do their homework, if we can have those things be in their day, maybe then we won't feel quite so stressed about the whole computer thing, because we
Right.
can
And
see
then if
that
we
they go
kind of
together.
Right. And if we take a kind of a step back and see that, okay, they're spending this much time and this much time actually away from that, we can then let go, because I think what happens is we focus in when they are doing that, and that gets our blood kind of going, because we think, oh,
Exactly, definitely.
again, right.
Yeah, so it's that collaboration with them, that we really want to kind of have that conversation again, like we were talking about, that we can't be their adversary. We have to join them and say, hey, let's talk about, these are some of my goals. What's your preferred schedule to meet those? So we're going to kind of do a bit of collaboration on that to make sure that both of our goals are getting met.
Mhm.
And so the endless scrolling, we all know what it's like, that we can get so wrapped up in being on our computer, and we're just mindlessly scrolling. We just want to make sure that that's not their entire day. And so it's not that we don't have to jump on them when we see them on their computer or on their phone, or, whatever they're doing, that, our assumption is often, oh my gosh, you're wasting your time. But let's kind of take a step back and say, I do that too. We all need to kind of have that mindless time. And so let me just, rather than reacting, let me step back and really look at this. Have I added some other things into the day? Have they accomplished some things? Have they been successful with a few productive things during the day? And so what if they're scrolling now?
One of the things I find so interesting about this, Lynn, is that the first time we are all on tech. So they're seeing their teachers struggling, right? I mean, I hear so much about this week, yeah, my teacher just tried to get on, that kind of thing. And so it's really kind of evening the playing field a little bit. And I think that's very, very interesting. And I think in many ways, we as adults are coming into their world in a real different way that we have not done that before.
Right. We're
So,
spending our days on Zoom all day long.
right, right. And so it's interesting, not that there are answers, but just kind of to take, to just sort of think about that, and to even throw those out as conversation topics with kids, I think is really good, because it helps them to sort of think about that.
And they are the experts on technology. And so to really ask them about that, and to, like approach them as if they do have that knowledge, because they do, they know so much more than we do. And so that those conversations go a lot more smoothly then.
But at the same time, knowing that we do know that too much of it is not very
Right.
good. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
So here's another question, Joyce. So my teen seems to have flip-flopped their schedule. So they're sleeping, going to bed at 5 a.m. and they're up all night, So is this okay?
So I'm assuming when you say they're up all night, they're sleeping all day. So, right. Um, so it's interesting, because we say, is this okay? Because there is a big piece of us that's saying this is not okay. So again, first, not acknowledging that and where that's coming from, I think is important. But Our schedules are adjusted. I think all of us. I have to say, being in a home with older teens and not having young children, the best part of it has been that we don't have to get up really early. So there are some good parts to this, right? But so our schedules are going to be adjusted. There's not the great need to wake up early, and teens' natural cycles are to sleep in, and they need a lot of sleep. So that's something we do know. So a little bit of a shift of paradigm is saying, oh, okay, they at least get to thrive physiologically in this way. We've been hearing so much research about wanting the school times to go later and all that kind of stuff has naturally happened for us. So, that's really something good to consider. Having said that, 5 a.m. means you're up all night and then you're sleeping all day. So let's consider this flip-flop schedule. Two things come to mind when I think about this. The first part is that if they're sleeping throughout the day when all of us are kind of functioning in life and doing things and trying to accomplish, that those teens are most likely not a part of the family in super meaningful ways. So because most teens are stuck with families, I shouldn't say stuck, they're in homes with families, safe at home with families. And so that's your community right now. And so always in any community that our teens are in, we want them to be thriving, positive members of that community. So that's the family. So we want them to be a part of that. And that means, sitting down for meals, having conversations, helping to take the garbage out, doing maybe some cooking or whatever it might be. So those pieces. So having said that, I want us to also remember that meaningful doesn't have to do so much with quantity as it does with quality. So we talked a lot about this in that, having them do hours and hours of productive, amazing things, sure, we would love it, but sort of being realistic and seeing in those expectations. But if they can be meaningful parts of our family, that's really important. It's important right now, especially because, we really need to be that sort of community that reflects back to them what a productive member is. The other part that I was thinking about when you were saying staying up all night and sleeping during the day is that it means that our teens don't have a lot of supervision. And that's kind of ironic because they're home. It's not like they're out somewhere all night, but they are in their rooms. And most of the time they're in their rooms on their own and they don't have that supervision because we're sleeping. And so again, sure, maybe there's not a lot that they can be doing. Maybe there is, but there is still that sense of nobody really knows what I'm doing. And so that's kind of it's sort of that not the safest place that we want our kids to be, not that they may be doing or whatever it might be, but we do want to help them to be safe. And so I think those are two things that come to mind.
So they're trying to get privacy.
Right.
So give it to them some other time? Is that the...
Yeah. So actually, I forgot to do that, right? So one of the things I was saying that I was thinking is that, so if we just let them know, hey, do this, this is what you have to do, like Lynn was saying, the other one, it's probably not going to go well. And so having conversations about why we're concerned, some of the things I just talked about, and then negotiating some parameters around what we can do to compromise. And one of the things, we always want to do is to kind of try to figure out why. Most of the time, there's not huge reasons of why. A lot of times I think this happens for teens because it's become a habit and they can. But also some of your teens might be feeling like this is the only time I have space all to myself. Because if we think about their regular day, they're away from us for at least minimum of 6 hours and even more if they're doing a sport or extracurricular, and they're on their own. They're being really independent. And so now all of a sudden being at home and you see them all the time, they see you, they might want to have way more privacy and space. And that's and that makes sense. That's something that we honor.
Be independent and away from us.
Right. And that's something we want to honor, but also having them understand, yes, but we still are in a home, an apartment together. And so how can we figure this out? But again, it's about those conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So whenever I ask a question or just say something, my teen lashes out at me like a trigger, then my anger escalates and we're at odds. So that's always an issue. What do we do?
Right. So when I think about this, I think again that we think about where teens are developmentally anyway. So this is a lot of times pretty normal teenage behavior anyway, right? And so, but because we are in challenging times, it might occur more often. The response might be much greater. There are going to be those kinds of adjustments. But taking a step back and saying, okay, this is pretty regular teenage behavior. I think that helps a lot. But to expect defiant behavior, because again, like I just said, it's pretty developmentally appropriate because they are trying to separate. But another part also is because these emotions are so large in our teens, right? They often they often do this when they are fearful, when there's grief, the disappointment that we've been talking about, the grief that we've been talking about. Those kinds of things can really come out in this sort of defiant behavior rather than sharing all of those emotions that they have. I think one of the things that is a little bit more hopeful is that, you know, many times teens have the ability to be able to articulate. It just might take some time, but knowing that they will eventually, given the supports and the empathy, they will be able to do that. So again, there's that empathy and compassion to help them work out those feelings so that they are safe to be able to have those, because they are feelings that are real and feelings that are completely understandable during these times and during most times. And then, of course, we always want an action piece of it, because it is important after allowing teens to have that time, is to help them to think about what might make them feel better. And a lot of times it has to do with connections. How can you connect with somebody else? It might be an actual activity. What is something that we can do? A service. We know that even though it might not be the first thing we think about, but if we can do something for somebody else, it oftentimes helps us feel just so much better about things, because it takes away whatever it is that we're going through for that moment. And then, of course, compassion, right? Having that compassion. Oops, I was going
Our
to
teens
mention
have
one more
such
thing.
a capacity for that compassion and helping others and doing that service. And so I like that idea of bringing that out of them.
You know, one thing I was going to mention, I went to the next slide and then I came back to it, was, you know, I heard something that I think makes a lot of sense. Oftentimes our teens, and we also as adults, we have these two beings within us. And so there's that one being of a teen that is that defiant, maybe angry, emotional, dramatic, like my life is in ruins, that type of, you know, that teen. But, you know, in most teens, there's also the other part that is actually an amazingly empathetic, wise, thinking, philosophical, problem solving, curious, inquisitive, all of there's that teen too. And so, and we know that there's both sides of us too, right? There is that nagging, annoyed, blowing, whatever kind of parent. And then there's that parent that's like, oh my goodness, so compassionate and so empathetic and all of those. And what's interesting is that, you know, the way I heard this is that when whoever we talk to, whichever teen we talk to, then that's the teen that shows up to the conversation most of the time. Not every time, but most of the time. So if we are talking to that teen who has all of those big emotions and is dramatic and defiant, then oftentimes that's the teen that will show up. And if we can be if we can talk to that that teen, I'm sorry, who is that empathetic thinking, you know, philosophical, then they will show up to do the problem solving and just to be able to share. The
So
tricky
sort of who do we expect to show up, huh?
But the tricky thing is, Lynn, that the empathetic, loving, all that parent and the empathetic, loving teen has to come up at the same time. And
But
so,
we respond to each other. So
yeah,
if we can be calmer, they can be calmer, right?
right. That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, that's great.
All right.
That's
Okay.
fun.
So, you know, actually, Lynn, some of the things we hear a lot about is I'm worried because my teen is so isolated during this time. I'm not quite sure about the friendships, and maybe I wasn't really thinking about it before, but it's kind of, in my face glaring, and I'm not quite sure if he was okay socially. Do you think he might be depressed or anxious or things like that might be going on?
Right. Yeah, so there's kind of two parts there. So the first part of that is about their friendships and, are they socially isolated? And so we all are, it's highly personal how social we are. That some of us are very social and others of us are thriving in this time. It's like, this feels perfect because I don't have to do that uncomfortable thing of, socializing and feeling awkward. And, we really have to kind of say, who is this child? What's their normal way of being? But are they at least connecting with a few close friends? Is there, they may only have that one real good buddy that, but are they at least reaching out to them? So I think that really, looking first at that social piece, how social are they? And then the other thing that we want to do is to really look at that developmental piece of the emotions, that when we're trying to figure out, are they depressed? Well, teens' emotions are all over the place, up and down, and so we expect that. We expect them to be emotional and to be angry and to be depressed and to be down. It's not that they aren't, but they shouldn't be like that all the time. What we want to see, what normally happens is that even though they're in their room and when we open the door and try and talk to them, they get angry, we're like, oh my gosh, they're having such a hard time. But then they pop out of their room and come over and show you that funny meme on their phone and they're laughing and everything's fine. It's like, okay, wait, we do have these moments of levity and things are fine. So we kind of have to, look at it and get some perspective on it. But if it's that, they really are, down for a long period of time, that's when we get worried. And the other thing is that anxiety is huge in teens. And so they may be feeling really anxious. And so what we want to do is sort of, again, look, is that, grossly out of proportion, or, are they just completely preoccupied with that anxiety? Or is it a fleeting anxiety? They've got it and it comes and goes. And so it's more of that issue of it stays and they don't move out of it. That's when we're concerned. And we do need to find some support. And there are supports out there, even now. We have telehealth available. And so, if it really has been going on for a couple of weeks, then I do encourage you to reach out and get a consultation.
Right. And in some ways, again, we talked a little bit about that generational with this media and, doing this. In some ways, teens might be a little bit more open to sharing because they're not like in the same space with, a therapist or whoever it might be that they're talking to. They might be willing to open up a little bit more. So it might be actually a better time for some of our teens.
Yeah, I think when we talk about how our teens are depressed all the time, they share their emotions a lot more than I think previous generations did.
Right.
And so I think we're aware of when they're really down, and they're willing to tell us. And so I think, ask about it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about that, psychological health. So many people have come to assume wrongly that psychological health, like physical health, means feeling good. And psychological health, however, really is about being free, it's not about being free from emotional discomfort. We have that. We're going to be emotionally uncomfortable. But it's about having the right feeling at the right time, the appropriate feeling at the appropriate time, and being able to bear those unpleasant feelings that we have. So we're designed to withstand discomfort and disappointment. That's resilience. We are able to do this. So, this is the one of the many ways that we can be resilient. And so we have both positive coping skills and negative coping skills. And, the time that we're in right now really calls for those positive coping skills. And so we need to model those. And so, withdrawing and using substances and taking our anger out on others and junk eating and, taking our phone to bed and staying there forever, those are really negative coping skills. But we're seeing those in this time. And so can we really think about what are those positive coping skills that we can be using? And so we're all gonna, even though we feel like we're doing pretty well, we're gonna get overwhelmed at some point. And so can we look at, I need to find a happy distraction for myself, when I really just feel like I can't cope anymore. And so if we can come out of this with some positive coping skills, we can really build that resilience.
And this doesn't mean, Lynn, that, we have to have positive coping skills all the time, right? It's not like we have to be,
Right.
again, like that we were talking about psychological, that doesn't mean that we're great all the time, because really, how can we be? But being real about it, naming them, and then being able to come back and not staying in that negative space, I think is really what we want to try to model as best as we can for our kids.
Yeah, exactly.
So that they can, yeah. All right. So what are some things that are positive that you're talking about, those skills that we can do during this time? And because again, for many of us, our family is the community. So how can we come through this together?
Yeah, so what I want to share with you here is actually from Dr. Laura Markham. She has a website, AHA Parenting, AHA Parenting, and she kind of came up with these ideas of, like, in this quarantine time, how can we make it a little more meaningful? And so, why not find ways as a family to, do some service? Even from the safety of our own homes, that can we find some new ways to connect with each other at home and, or with other people virtually. And I think a lot of people are doing this one. Can we take this time to learn something new? Joyce, I know you said that you're starting to learn the guitar. It's like, that's exciting. There, like, what's your interest that you don't usually get to pursue? So, make art, and, can we really just create some beauty and, add that to our lives? Or, can we use this as an opportunity to develop more friendliness to ourselves and to others? Can we, do some more of that mindfulness, that we can become more aware of who am I and how am I showing up in the world? And, why not use this opportunity to develop, sorry, I read that one. Why not use our disappointments to enrich the present moment and grow into better versions of ourselves? And so those are some that that Dr. Laura Markham mentioned. And so I feel like this time is an opportunity, good or bad. It's, what we make of it.
And it's not in any way taking away the real and the stress, right? I mean, many of us are facing this economic time of just maybe the worst that we've ever seen, or maybe it's a time that's so stressful that it reminds us of another time. So I think when we talk about these things, is not in any way putting those away, but in the midst of what our reality is, what is it that we can do that can help us to get to that next day, and maybe even to thrive, or maybe and to build that resilience. And again, that's what we want the most in our kids, right? I mean, you talked about, Lynn, some kids do need that bigger community of friends. Some are really good with one or two. And so how can we make that real for them, right? So I was just kind of thinking about that's really what we're trying to do. We're not saying do all of these things and everything will be okay, but really
One step at a time.
right, what is our reality? And just like we talked about, going back to that very first question that we had about motivation, because I think for a lot of us as adults, what we're going through, we're having a hard time finding that motivation. And so but we also are parents at the same time. So being aware of ourselves and also how can we impact our kids. So yeah.
Yeah.
Along with that, we're coming sort of to the end of our time. We wanted to give you some resources. These are some of our fundamental basic resources that we do have in Yolo County. And so we'll have this available as a recording, and these are things that you can reach out to for those fundamental needs. All of those there. The other part is that we wanted to share a couple of really, really great resources for teens. And there's so many things out there, but here's some of our favorites that we really think help a lot. Screenagers movie, if any of you have seen it, it's a wonderful look at what really is a big part of our kids' generation, what they're born with and what they're having is the screens. And so you can't see the movie on this website, but they have a lot of other real resources. If you ever do get a chance to see the movie, I do urge you to do that. But what they do have that I think is really cool is they have this thing called Tech Talk Tuesdays, and there are articles on different topics that you can look up. Another one that we really like is childmind.org. If you go to the families tab and then you scroll down to topics, there's a lot of different things that are pertaining to teens that are very, very helpful. Okay. And then of course, I know one of our favorites, Dan Siegel, he talks a lot about the brain, and he does a lot about the newborn brain, but he talks also a lot about the adolescent brain. And so
about our parenting brain.
our Remember I talked about like the fantastic teen showing up with a fantastic parent, and if that can just happen, right? He talks a lot about that type of thing, much more eloquently. And so, there's a resource tab, and then there's a new parenting videos tab, and I have those right there for you. The other website that we think is really valuable is called understood.org, and it's a website that supports families with individuals who learn and think differently. And again, it's just a really great, valuable resource that you don't get to see often, and there's a special space there for families. And that's really good. And of course, one of my favorite books is The Teenage Brain, and that it's just a book, whether you do it on Amazon or a good solid book like I have. It's just one of those books that you just kind of always reach for, and in my case, I just kind of fold down the corners, but it's a real good one to have around there. So the other part, we wanted to let you know that through Home Run West Sacramento, we have tips for families that we have available. And this was our third virtual hangout, and Lynn and I have really been enjoying ourselves. We have one more, if you could tell us about that one.
So we're actually going to repeat the teen, and then we'll be doing some in May that will be around some of the things that we can do to help our families to be more resilient. And so we would love any questions that you have. If you email them to us, then we can definitely respond when we're on next.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the next one will be the same recording and the same subject.
On the 29th, we'll be on, yes. And then we'll send out another flyer with some May dates.
And here's mine and Lynn's, our emails. Please contact us for anything, even just to be able to reach out and connect with you. We really think that's one of the best things that we get to do about our job. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right.